Hello and welcome to episode 2 of Shift with Maddi. My name is Maddi, of course, and I am your host. Now, I started this podcast literally last week, so this is week number 2. Last week we spoke about decision making and how I made the biggest decision of my life. I'm going to give you a little recap of where I'm at the moment. I just moved back from Australia. I lived out there for 2.5 years. I'm currently living at my parents' house. I'm in the process of starting this up, and I just want to share everything that I'm doing right now and everything I've done over the last couple of years with you in case you're at a place where I was. I felt a little bit stuck. I felt like I was not living a life that was meant for me. I felt like I kind of just slipped and fell into loads of different things. And I've only just in the last couple of years started really intentionally creating and changing my life. So that's why Shift with Maddi has come into existence. And I'm starting this episode with a little bit of a recap of my weekend. Why, you ask? Well, firstly, this is my podcast, bitch. If you don't want to listen to my weekend, what are you doing? Lol, joking. But really, it's because it's relevant to this episode. So I have just come back from Nottingham to watch the Twisted Pole Summer Showcase. Now, I am a pole dancer. I've been pole dancing for 10 years. I bloody love it. It's such a huge part of who I am. I'm an instructor. And I went to watch my home studio showcase. I honestly am surprised I have a voice left because I was literally screaming the whole time like a like there's a very universal pole dance yes everywhere in the world you go. It's actually quite fantastic. I had the best time in Nottingham, and it's just reminded me of why I've set my goal for this week. Now, I consider myself quite an active person, but since I came back from Australia, I feel like I've kind of let things go a little bit. I'm sure I'm not the only one who's been there, where you kind of just fall out of the pattern a little bit. Other things take priority. And I love fitness. Like, I'm a pole dancer. I got into running while I was in Australia, I'll have you know. Not that I'm a particularly good runner, but you know what? It's the taking part that counts, okay? I do some functional fitness. Like, I really like being active, and I'm really looking forward to getting back into it this week. And I'm doing about 2 sessions a week. I'm not completely sedentary, but I want to get up to 5 sessions this week. So the reason I'm introing with this is because if you've done any sort of goal setting before, you'll probably listen to that and be like, ooh, Maddi, that's a bit of a jump, ambitious girlie, going from 2 to 5 sessions. And ordinarily, I would say yes. That's a really big increase and a really big ask of your nervous system. But fitness is one of my default settings. And that is what today's episode is about. Today, we're going to be talking about why we find certain areas of our lives really easy and effortless, and why we find certain areas of our life like you're pushing a boulder up a hill. Like, you know that who's that Greek guy? Sisyphus? And he is constantly pushing the boulder up the hill, and then it goes down to the bottom and he has to go down and get it up, and it just feels like you're wading through mud. And if you're thinking about it now, I wonder if there's a goal of yours or an area of your life where for so long you've been trying to make a change, and every single time you think you've made progress, you just end up back at square one. And you look at the rest of your life or at other areas and you're like, why do I find that so easy, but I suck at this? Why is that? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. By the end of this episode, we're going to know why we do that, why we are so good at some things and not at others. And also, I'm going to give some tips that I would have given myself at the beginning of my big change, which I'm going to tell you about now. So like I said, fitness is one of my default areas. What is a default area? When I'm talking about default settings, default area, what actually is that? So default is referring to the automatic behaviors, thoughts, and patterns that show up in your life. So it's the things that you do without even thinking about them. And the funny thing is, most of our behavior, whether we think it or not, is actually governed by our automatic behaviors. So only about 10% of our decisions is actually governed by our prefrontal cortex or by our decision making, our conscious decision making. Most of our behavior that we do every single day is pre-learned. It's a script that we're just following again and again and again. I could talk about default settings all freaking day. I love them. But I am going to use 2 specific examples, and I'm going to use my personal experience, my default setting, which I quite like, which is my fitness, and my default setting, which I decided I had to change, which was my romantic relationships. honestly, there will be future episodes where you will hear all about my dating experiences of the past, but today is not that day. Yes, that quote was intentional. If you know, you know. And like I said in the previous episode, I'm not coming to you as someone who is an expert or someone who is a psychologist. I'm coming to you as someone who has done this research because she wanted to change her own life, because she saw a part of her life that she wasn't happy with and she wanted to change it. Little did I know 2 years ago when I started on my little journey is that I would start living by this concept now. As soon as you know it, you can't unknow it. And it just makes everything make so much sense. And yours might be really different from mine. So as we go through this episode, start thinking about what areas of your life do you find super easy and resistance free? And what areas do you find really difficult? How do you feel about your career or money or friendships or romantic relationships? Like where do you find that your life just naturally falls into place, and where are you finding the most resistance? Where is the part of your life where if you changed it, that would be the thing that made the biggest impact to you right now? Have a think about that, because we're going to visit it at the end. So here's a bit for the psychology nerds out there, because I am a psychology nerd. I'm a psychology graduate, and every time I'm trying to learn something, I'm always straight on researching, why does this happen? What's my brain doing? So basically, we learn from the moment we're born. We are learning patterns and we are learning behaviors. We are learning what is keeping us safe. We're learning what is keeping us loved. We're learning what is keeping us getting attention and affection and all of the things that we need as children. And we do continue to learn through our adulthood as well. Our brain is forever changing. However, a default setting is when we have repeated a behavior or a thought pattern so many times that our brain, helpfully or unhelpfully, basically says, I've noticed that every time this happens, you do this. And I've noticed that so far we haven't died. Therefore, I'm going to assume that this is keeping us safe, and I'm going to create an automatic pathway between this thing and that reaction or that thought or that behavior. And our brain is trying to help, bless its heart, bless its brain. Anyway, because it's trying to reduce the amount of conscious decisions we have to make every single day. Because if we had to make a decision about every single thing, I think our brains would explode. Think about how many things we do in a day, how much information we receive. So it's trying to help. And it is kind of helpful sometimes. Like if you walk around the corner and there's a bear, then you're not going to stand there and think, does it look hungry? Does it look like it's angry? I don't know. Like if you see that bear, you're going to run. Like your body's going to respond before your brain does. Not so helpful when the threat that's being perceived is a fear of visibility or a fear of rejection or a fear of abandonment or things that aren't actually life-threatening and are actually just keeping us stuck in a place where we feel like we might want to grow. Is that making sense so far? So these automatic pathways that we're talking about, these default settings, are things that now we don't consciously decide to do. Our brain has learned them and has wired our brain to respond without us even having to make a decision about how we respond to a situation. And you might notice this in certain areas of your life. For today's episode, we're talking about default areas as opposed to certain belief patterns, because we just don't have time to go into it all, team. But for example, when I first landed in Australia and I had nothing. Obviously, I had my sister and my best friend, very grateful, but I had no structure. I had no job. I didn't know where I was going to be living long term. But within 48 hours, I was at a pole dance studio. And within a month, I'd made a big friendship group. And I remember my sister saying to me, because we have very different default settings. And I remember her saying, she was like, how do you already have more friends than I do? And I was like, because making friends has always been a default area for me. I've always been really good at it. And I think now's the time to acknowledge default settings aren't always bad. Like our brain does it for a reason. And you know what? I'm not going to sit here and be a dickhead and be like, oh my God, I just naturally am really active. I just naturally find fitness so easy. Like obviously not. Like I love that I'm an active person. I love that about myself. Like I wouldn't want to change that. And the same with my friendships. Like I love that I make friends easily. I'm not going to sit here and be like, I'm just too popular. Like, come on, what a dickhead. But, like I said, there are also parts of my life where those automatic responses did not come in helpful, i.e. my romantic relationships. As a tiny overview, I was single for most of my 20s. I had a couple of year-long relationships that were not particularly healthy. And I basically used to have situationship after situationship with, let's be real, fuckboys. And I just was repeating the same pattern again and again. And I really wanted a husband and children. So, I knew I kind of had to sort that shit out, but I just didn't know for the life of me how to get into a relationship. I sucked. I absolutely sucked. So if there's something I want you to take away from this, firstly, it's not your fault. If you find that there is a really big resistance in your life somewhere, then it's not because you're lazy. It's not because you just can't be asked or because you're bad at it. It's because your brain has learned something. And if you're trying to do something new, then you are trying to rewrite a pathway that your brain's already learned. You're literally fighting against yourself. So you're not lazy. It can be quite difficult to do. Not impossible though. And this is where the good news comes in. Science has shown we have something called neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is basically the ability to rewrite our brain. We are able to choose and create new pathways, new patterns, new automatic behaviors, which means that in theory, we can choose whoever the fuck we want to be. If we don't like something, we can change it. And it seems really simple. I think anyone who has tried to change something that they feel a resistance towards knows that's not the case. It's not simple. If not, we'd all be like fucking millionaires or something. And I really felt this when I was doing my work on romantic relationships. When I got to Australia, I had one final situationship that just pushed me over the edge. And I was like, right, I'm not doing this again. Something has to change. And so it did. I decided to go balls deep in identity work and figure out why I had the patterns that I did. And slowly but surely, I learned how to change them. It is possible. And I deeply, deeply believe that we can change any belief that we want to change. It might just take a bit of time. So how do we actually change that behavior? Well, the long and short of it is you have to make it conscious. You can't change